Okay, so welcome to episode 6 of the White Shark Interest Group podcast. We have got an absolute treat for you today. I've been itching to get this guest on our show. For joining me today, I'm Ricardo, one of the admins of the White Shark Interest Group. We are currently sat at just short of 47,000 members, which makes us the largest White Shark specific group on Facebook. And if you are listening to this podcast and you are not currently a member of that group, please head over to Facebook, search the White Shark Interest Group. There'll be a little question about why you want to join the group. Just give us a shout out, say I heard the podcast and I'm not a member. We've had a few of those coming in now. It's good to hear from you. So joining me today, we have our founder, Mr. Dirk Schmidt again.
Yeah, hi.
And our special guest this episode is, now I use the word legend sometimes and he's going to hate me for saying it. So it's plain old Rob Lawrence.
Oh, there we go. Oh, there, boys.
Rob Lawrence is a pioneer in the shark world. If you've ever seen an image from South Africa of a white shark breaching from the water, whether it's Airjaws, Nat Geo, BBC, Shark Week, or any photographs online and in books, if you've ever seen that image of a breaching white shark, then you have Rob Lawrence to thank, because he was one of the pioneers who took out the false bay and documented and observed breaching behaviour. And with his highly successful company, African Shark Eco Charters, he's worked with hundreds of thousands of people to visit and dive and film and photograph great whites, to see natural predation behaviour that false bay is famous for, and to make white shark advocates of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, he has, without a doubt, been to Seal Island in False Bay, one of the hot spots of white shark activity in the world. He's been to that island more than any other human being alive. No doubt about it. Now let that sink in for a second. Because he remains very humble and he's not in your face with self-promotion. He just wants to let the experience and the sharks speak for themselves. And he can share decades of knowledge about our favourite animal. And that is why I was stoked for him to come on the podcast today and talk to us. So welcome to the show, Rob, and so glad to have you on here.
No, it's good to be here. I actually started with the White Sharks in the early 90s, in 92. I think it was 91 or 92 is when I saw my first white shark way back. And that was originally at in Dar Island in Gansbaai. I sort of volunteered. They used to have a white shark exhibition in the waterfront. And I started sort of doing volunteer work there. And then one thing led to the next, and we were sort of working on the boats as sort of crew. Originally, before really the tourist sector started, it was just early days of tagging and heading out of Gansbaai. So if you head out of Gansbaai or Dar Island, today it's like the white shark capital. But in the early days, it was literally a one-horse fishing town. And I worked with I think it was a National Geographic show with Paul Atkins called Great White Shark, and that was in 1992. And then that's sort of where it started. So between studying on the weekends and when we could, we sort of ran into that area. Yeah, then along with a colleague, we sort of in mid-95, we had ideas of going to Seal Island. And in 96, we headed out in a small little inflatable boat. Yeah, and then we encountered these white sharks around Seal Island that no one had really observed.
So what were the stories before that, before you chose Seal Island to go out to? Was then obviously no one was operating in that area, but what were the sightings and stories about white shark breaching?
As far as the breaching goes, there weren't a hell of a lot. Look, False Bay itself had a long history. If you go back, there's photos in Simonstown and in Gordons Bay on the other side of the bay from the turn of the century of dead white sharks and fishermen seeing them around their boats. And there was the odd story of the sharks jumping into people's boats, but it was never really documented or recorded or witnessed as a purpose. It was usually a bit of a sideline. So False Bay had a long history, but prior the guys that started, there was a guy in the mid-80s who tried to get a white shark thing going. Never took off. It was just sort of left to dwell, and then Gansbaai became the shark spot for a few years. And then until I started working there in the as I say, when we say working, it was really like sort of a bunch of young guys not really knowing what they were doing, just running around, having a good time. And slowly but surely we realized there was quite a unique spot, and we bounded around for several years up until 99, 2000. We pitched this film we did a segment with Nat Geo. They were actually shooting in Gansbaai, and they came out for one day. It was a show called Great White Deep Trouble. They got some footage of the white sharks breaching, and that was the first time it was actually documented. Before what you might hear, and contrary to other areas, and that it was well before Discovery Channel, it was before Airjaws. Airjaws actually followed the year after that, because one of the guys on that shoot was a guy by the name of Rocky Strong, Dr. Rocky Strong. He was one of the first white shark guys. He had worked with the Cousteaus also through the 90s and that, and he was with that National Geo show. There was Peter Benchley was on it, and David Dubélé, and a whole lot of the guys. And they ended up extending their stay in False Bay for, I think it was about a week. They shot some of the first breaching and predation stuff properly. And in the following year, 2000, we did the show Airjaws of, I think it's called Airjaws of Sharks of South Africa with Rocky, and that sort of put us on the map, so to speak.
Was that the first Airjaws one where Rocky climbs on the whale carcass while the sharks are feeding around?
That was the one. So sort of
crazy.
That was, but there was a bit of the Wild West in those days. Yeah, we've sort of gone from one extreme to the other, from no regulations to being regulated to the hilt. So I suppose it is good and bad, but sort of, that was the general timeline, and then that took off, and then with the advent of Discovery Week and Shark Week, some of the films took a turn for the interesting part, shall we say. And so that's sort of the timeline of getting put on the map. And then we worked from then 2000, 2010, that decade, where the sharks were like clockwork. From 2004 onwards, those 6 or 7 years, it was not possible to go to Seal Island and not see a white shark.
Wow.
I mean, what made you guys go out initially to Seal Island in your little rubber duck? Was it just what you heard, or was it just curiosity, or was it just like a fisherman's tale or something like that? Or did you really know they were going to be white sharks there?
No, we suspected as much. We went to go look for them, obviously, because we had slowly, because in the past, a lot of the guys traditionally always used to go in the summer months when the seal pups were there. They would go and they would pump gallons and gallons and gallons of ox blood and chum and the whole tutti frutti and get nothing. And then with having worked at Dyer Island, where they sort of worked out the winter and summertime patterns, where there seemed to be a movement of sharks inshore during the summer months and to the islands in the winter months, we headed out there, and in our winter months, in the winter season, we just encountered a whole lot of sharks. We saw some hunting activity. We towed a small decoy behind, because that original show, that Great White Shark show with the Atkins in 92, they had done something similar at the Farallon Islands, Scott Anderson. And that was the first sort of still images of white sharks leaving the water. Is
that where they put the camera on the board?
On the big surfboard, that was in 92 or 91, up roughly that time period. And then, but it was sort of, they would just put it out there in drifts, and they had that shark, I think they're called Stumpy, was the one that would come along and do the odd breach every now and then, but literally they would sit for hours at a time. They came out and it managed to, and within the space of a few minutes, we had several sharks around this little 3.5 meter or 10-foot inflatable boat. So we realized we would coin a phrase, we need a bigger boat.
Get a bigger boat, yeah.
I don't think it was everything. We never really thought about making a business out of it all. It was just something we were doing, and one thing led to the next, and sort of the rest is history, as they say, to a certain point.
The whole industry's really taken off, and I think you were instrumental in really bringing so much attention to False Bay and making it one of the world hotspots in terms of seeing great white sharks with like great regularity. But then obviously you guys were very aware of obviously that the seasonality of the sharks being there, and them only coming at a certain time of year and so forth. And maybe just explain to our listeners in terms of the normal migration areas that you find, that how the sharks arrived at the island at what times and where they hung around and so forth. I mean, your experience around the island is second to none. I just love hearing all your stories in terms of how you found out all the sectors that were the approach sectors to the island that were most popular with great whites, and where they hung out, and the reefs just before Seal Island and so forth.
So in False Bay and Cape Town, there's sort of two prevailing wind directions. We have a southeasterly wind, which sort of runs from, if you look at a map of Seal Island, it comes from sort of the deep sea area inshore. That's our southeasterly wind, and that's predominantly our summertime wind. And the wintertime, the wind's a northerly wind, which runs from sort of Table Mountainside out to sea. And that determines where you can anchor and work around the island. But traditionally, when we first went, it was just a case of trial and error, really, basically. Because when we first started in the early 90s, we had about 6 months where you would, like clockwork, from about April, May, June, July, August, September, have massive volumes of white sharks. But outside of that, you would go to the island and hardly see them. These are great whites we're talking. And then the more we worked and the more time we put in, we realized that sort of from end of January, early February, you would have the odd white shark. You would go see a couple, miss a couple of days. So the more time we put in, the more we worked on the schedule. We came up with a synopsis that basically the area was a winter feeding ground where you would get congregations and aggregations of white sharks through the winter months. Main reason being it's a known food source. The seal pups would get to a particular age, then they would be weaned from their parents, and then they would head out to sea. And the first few times they would head out, they would be vulnerable. They wouldn't stick in their structured groups for protection. So they would literally became cannon fodder. So usually the last last 2 weeks of July, first 2 weeks of August would be the very, very, very best time when you would see in excess of 40 predation events, have 14, 15, 16 white sharks, 10 white sharks around your boat would be a slow day. And then in the summer months, they would start seeing them along our coastline, moving up and down from sort of first week into October. And then the more they see them inside along the coast, like Muizenberg, Gordons Bay, off Simonstown, Millers Point area, then they would be declined at the island. So you would always get the odd one at the island, but for regularity and being able to offer a service to your people, we eventually had about 8 months of the year where we would be pretty successful. That has obviously changed quite drastically in the last 4 or 5 years, but particularly the last couple of years with vastly reduced numbers of white sharks, but multitude of factors there, but we'll probably get into that.
Yeah, I think we'll have a chat about that for sure. We'll pick that up, yeah.
Just before lockdown now, we had a couple of sightings slightly inshore, so we're very, very keen to get out to see what's happening. So the limited thing is that you're used to traditionally have a sort of a winter and a summertime pattern with around Seal Island, the sharks would be there in good solid numbers in the winter months, and you would have a little bit of in-between period where the numbers would be less. And then in summertime, the peak of our summer, obviously different to the Northern Hemisphere, sort of October, November, December, January, would be very quiet around Seal Island with the odd visitor. So we used to work actively from sort of end of January, middle of Feb up until sort of first week of October.
Just obviously we'll get into and we'll have a chat about sort of how things are currently, in a bit. It's important and it is interesting to talk about. Can I just in those early days, when you're out at the island, one of the things obviously for listeners who don't know, but many do, obviously the topography of Seal Island and False Bay is really what leads itself to the breaching behaviour, because you will get breaches elsewhere, but obviously not on that volume and that scale and and that kind of that massive predation activities. Did you understand like the topography of the island and the behavior of the sharks in those days?
Yeah, it's all learned behavior. It's like anything. So there's a particular route and pattern, like Dirk was talking about, like we broke. When they call Seal Island an island, it's actually a big rocky outcrop. So it's not your big picturesque island. You can't really land on the island. There's no structures on the island. A few old remnants of old lighthouse, a light pillar. So the island is pretty much covered in Cape fur seals, probably anywhere between 50 and 60,000 seals. Some say higher, but you can roughly put it about 60-odd thousand seals when it's full up, plus several 100,000 Cape cormorants and other bird species. The movement of the seals traditionally would be they would go out and feed for several days at a time, but there would be a movement pattern in the morning and afternoon where they would have to cross a sort of area we dubbed like the ring of death or the ring of peril, depending how well you were going that day with your English. There was like an area where obviously the sharks were congregating around the deep drop-off. So the seals would generally stay submerged as long as they can, coming and going from the island. They got their own strategy. They would be in groups, and we found individual seals were far more likely to be targeted than groups. They would hit groups, but it was just basically observations over a lengthy period of time that we sort of worked out that certain areas in the island that we gave, like we broke the area up into 6 sectors, and certain areas around the island were far more likely to have active hunting and breaching activities, and that was generally on the southern end of the island where the seals were moving out towards the deep water. And they would forage and scavenge around the island all the time. But as I said, at one stage, the sheer volume of sharks there at the right time of the year made it almost anywhere you would get predation and hunting activity at the right time if the conditions were correct.
And do you remember your first breach you saw around the island?
Yeah, very clearly. That was that first day in that inflatable boat, and then there's obviously you don't really forget it. It's quite such an ingrained image, having this massive thing come flying out the water unexpectedly, hoping to see it. No, it's quite a unique thing, and hopefully we'll be seeing it soon again.
Yeah.
Dirk, do you remember seeing your first breach out there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I obviously took a picture of the first one, but yeah, it was just amazing, and you kind of get hooked on it. After that, it becomes like a bit of an adrenaline rush, to see them, and when you that because it's an unknown. You don't know exactly when it's going to happen. You're expecting it, and I mean, I've been sat on rod boats for many hours, and we were trolling around. There was nothing, and then all of a sudden you have like 2-3 hits on the decoy again, or a natural predation around, and it's always super exciting. There's never really a dull moment, when especially with if you're dragging the decoy around and you're trying to lure the sharks to inspect it. It's amazing. It's an experience that I can really recommend to everybody. And if you ever wanted to know anything about white sharks, is just get out there to these islands and actually learn about them. It's a really great experience.
Well, one of the things I do want to sort of say, because I know, Rob, you're very modest sometimes, but your knowledge is world class. And I know of all the operators that are around that area, one thing that you will find if you're a listener and you want to head out to South Africa is Rob's business, African Shark Eco Charters. Rob, you go out on pretty much every trip you can get out on, don't you?
Yep.
You are on the boat and you are passing your knowledge to guests. You know, it's absolutely priceless. You cannot put a value on that. Is it something that you're still keen to, after all these years, still go out on all those trips?
Yeah, look, we've got a operation running that we've got guys that do relieve us that, but I still generally at sea the bulk of the time, as much as we can do, and especially the last. It hasn't really changed that much. As I say, we've still kept the operation relatively small and in-house. Our boat has changed since Dirk was laid out. We've picked up a new boat a couple of years back.
Great.
But the operation is still very, very similar, because that's sort of been a bit of a case that the wheel's not broke, so don't fix it sort of thing. So what's been working well has worked well over the years. As I say, it has changed a little bit in the last few seasons, but I get to see as much as I can, and I'm out there a hell of a lot. So this lockdown's probably been the longest period I've been on land in my entire life without getting out to sea. So it's driving me a bit crazy.
I bet your legs will be shaky when you get back on the boat.
Yeah, looking forward tomorrow. We're going to give it a whirl tomorrow and see what we can find after 70 odd days of not being there.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing! Can it just, so when you're going out on all those trips, Rob, is that because it is inherently part of the business now that you do that, or is it because you still just love being out at sea?
Oh no, I love being out at sea. So there's never been a day I've got up and go, oh no, geez, I don't want to go to work today. So I think the day that happens, then it's time to change your setup. As I say, it's just something that I enjoy doing. It's and as you say, every day is different. You meet different people every day. You see something different. It has its challenges. It's not always a discovery day on TV where everything's working perfectly.
But even on a slow day out on the boat with you, even when there were maybe no sharks around, the knowledge that you're just giving everybody and the experience of being out at Seal Island, was just something phenomenal. One particular thing I remember that stood out for me with regards to breaching we were just talking about, I remember being on the boat and I remember we towed the decoy for about 35 minutes, and we're getting nothing. And there was just no activity at all. And everybody's got their cameras pointing at that decoy. Everybody's, trying to keep the camera steady and find a place for 30 minutes, and the legs are tired and so on. And I remember we kind of came around the back of the island and pulled the decoy in, and everybody's got their cameras off because it's just not happening. But you said, we'll go once more. Whether it was a hunch or not, we'll have another go. And I remember it was Alison Skidmore who was on, and she wound the decoy in. Everyone's not even got their cameras set up yet, and she just threw it back in the water, ready to start towing. And within a second, when nobody's got their cameras on it, whoosh, literally 15 meters from the boat, just happened out of the corner of your eye, this huge breach. But I remember we didn't get any breaches after that, but you took the time, and you guys on the boat, and just passed on so much knowledge about breaching behavior and the island and so on. I cannot tell you how much that spreads from when people are being out on a boat, that they take that back with them, even on a slow day when your expectations might have been, I want to see a breaching shark. Even if you don't see them, I think there's still something to be said from being out at sea with a guy like you.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
Dirk, I know you've talked before when we made the film, which I'm not going to do my shameless plug for, which I normally do.
Okay.
Actually, I will. Great White Shark Legend, available on Amazon and Vimeo. You've talked in there, Dirk, about Rob's knowledge and passing that knowledge on. Have you got any experiences from when you guys have been out working together on the boat?
The one that I think you brought up to just now with regard to, when reeling the decoy in as well. I mean, you just never know. I mean, there might be a shark under the boat. There might be a shark, just in the vicinity. To a point, I mean, a lot of people always, put their cameras away. And Rob always said, just, you never know. Just keep it out there. And I got a few lucky shots like that too, where, we were reeling in the decoy and, lo and behold, the shark, literally meters from the boat, breaches up, or you can see him rising up and you get a couple of good shots. But it's I think also the experience that Rob brings along has always been fascinating to listen to. And, I remember the many hours we were sitting and people were cage diving and sitting in the rolling seas off Seal Island, and you can smell all the you can very clearly smell the seals.
The stink, as Rob's boy Adam called it. Stink. What stink? The seals. What about them? The poo.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of but you kind of get used to that. It's kind of the it's just what it is, and just can hear them. The cacophony of sound from them, and it's just an amazing adventure. The whole thing is just, and I've always enjoyed going out with Rob. But it's always been something new that I learned, and he's probably tired of answering my gazillion questions that I'm kind of I always ask him. But it's been a great source of knowledge that he's shared with us, and I'm sure with everybody's on his boat going forward as well. I just wanted to really ask Rob as well. I mean, we've all heard about, and I'm sure it's a pressing question that a lot of people want to know about, is like, what is the self situation with white sharks now in False Bay? Because I think that's something that is really pressing and really concerning, obviously, because I still consider False Bay one of the white shark meccas of the world. But we've obviously seen some declines in numbers, and for a multitude of reasons, and everybody has an answer for that. But I'd like to see Rob's insights into that, and also what other sharks he's seen, like the copper sharks and the cow sharks that have come up. So I'd just like to know, maybe hear of Rob's experience on the other sharks that we've seen, not just great whites, that have come up besides the great whites, and then obviously the whole orca story.
So there's been quite especially in the last sort of 3 years, a drastic change in the behavior. Sort of 2012 was the first year we had a big gap in seeing white sharks, and that was the year we had O-Search was out, and they were hooking sharks at the island, and sort of it coincided with the day following them hooking several sharks that they disappeared for 40 odd days, and everybody just put it down to that, and then it seemed to get back to normal the following year. And when they did return later in 2012, everything seemed to be fairly normal. And then 2018 was the first time they just didn't seem to arrive. And then we had them for sort of 3 months during the peak of our season, but the numbers were drastically reduced. And then last season, we didn't, for the first time since I've been at that island in 1996, so more than 20 years, we went our entire season without seeing a single great white shark at the island, which was sort of unheard of. But that also coincided with multitudes, same in Kranspy, of having long runs of several months of not seeing white sharks. In between that, then, as Dirk was saying, we had other shark species come up, bronze whaler sharks, but mainly at Seal Island we had large volumes of cow sharks coming up around the boat. So we continue to find the white sharks, but last season was very, 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 very bad. And then this year there's been 2 days where we've had white sharks at the island leading up. This was in our traditional quieter season. So there had been better sightings on the inside from shark spotting program, some of the fishermen, and we encountered some on some inshore areas and moving around. Some of the other boats, one of the other shark boats had seen on the inside. And then there was a day where we had a shark at the island. So we'll have to see. But as far as the reason, the first thing people say, it's the Orcas port and starboard. We've got these two infamous Orcas that have been doing the rounds, killing a lot of cow sharks. They were accused of killing a lot of the white sharks in Kranspy. We've encountered them at the island on several occasions, not while the white sharks have been there. They definitely decimated the cow sharks around the island, and the cow sharks would disappear. But there's a multitude. The one that guys are stipulating now that they're feeding on is that the smaller smooth-out sharks and the far-eye sharks form a big part of their diet, which they do. So they're speculating that could be the reason. It could also be that False Bay is heavily polluted now because we're sitting at the back end of a big city which has grown exponentially in the last 20 years. I think Cape Town's population, even since Dirk's left Cape Town the last 7 or 8 years, has probably almost doubled again.
Wow.
Especially in the informal settlement areas. And a lot of those areas feed the main river areas that run into False Bay. I think it's an absolute multitude. And I think one of the big things is that we also maybe overestimated the number of white sharks we thought we had in the get-go. So there was never a set number, and people were trying to judge their numbers from hotspots like Kranspy or False Bay or Mossel Bay. And the problem is these sharks move in great distances. And I think everybody, myself included, we probably overestimated the number of sharks that were up and down our entire coastline. I think it's everything. I don't think there's one particular reason why the numbers have declined. There seems to be a push up our east coast because throughout the time when Kranspy and False Bay were down, Mossel Bay seemed to have an upturn in the numbers of sharks. And not only in the numbers of sharks and the size of the sharks, but traditionally they used to see smaller sharks. And Mossel Bay is another seal colony, probably 400 or 500 kilometers up our east coast. And in Plettenberg Bay, there's an area where they seem to be seeing them inshore. So I don't think it's total gloom and doom yet. I think it's definitely something to be very, very concerned about. But as far as False Bay goes, I'm reluctant to say specifically what reason. I think it's a multitude. I think everybody's theory has got merit and weight, and I think them killing their summertime food source, the walleye and the smooth-out sharks, have definitely play a huge part in it. But I think so does the water clarity, the pollution in the water. It's just really hard to put it down, but it is very concerning. So we were hoping now before the lockdown and the COVID-19 scenario that with early season sightings, which was looking way more promising. Last year we had nothing, no sightings, zero, not a single thing. And this year, in our quieter time leading up to our white shark season, we had several sightings, not lots, but we had sharks at the island. We had a few sightings in Saw. We had 3 sharks seen on the one day. So there were, and these were confirmed sightings close to the island, in and around. So it was looking, it might have turned up a little bit. So it's, we're just going to have to wait and see. But it is very concerning. I think the white sharks are in serious trouble at the moment.
Well, I think the thing with the orcas, I think it's a good headline. I think everyone, I mean, when that first started happening, and these white sharks keep getting washed up with the livers out, and there's no question, from my opinion, and obviously I want to get your input and Dirk's on this, that the behaviour of the white sharks, particularly there, if there is danger around, like when O Search boat rocked up, they will flee and they will go, and they will either go deep or they'll go somewhere else. But to stay away for that length of time, I never really put that down to that could purely just be 2 orcas. I just didn't see that could be it on its own, and I still don't think it has. But the water quality issue, I've heard that crop up before, Rob, and is anybody actually doing any work and study on that you know of?
They actually did, the Argyles at the University of Cape Town, but they're tracking more plastic pollution and that. So I was actually reading a piece this week that during the lockdown, they actually, now that the beaches were closed, they could do fairly accurate counts of plastic particles and that. And they were finding plastic things washing up the beach dating back to the early 90s. So they've got stuff bobbing around and washing up in False Bay that's been bobbing around there for 20 years. The water clarity, they do take samples. We've got some of our blue flag beaches that have been downgraded because of high E. coli counts in the water and that. So there is work done through the city of Cape Town, and they still pump the raw effluent water in and around Cape Town. Not so much in False Bay, but they've got overflow areas. But on the other side, by Hout Bay and Camps Bay side, they pump raw sewage out. They say it's treated and that. They also opened a desalination plant on the inside when we had our water crisis a few years back. So there's a multitude of pressures on the bay. As I say, it's a very beautiful, unique area, but I don't think anybody really knows. For us, it seems like an overnight thing that they've disappeared, but it could have been, this has been building up, and it's just like sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back. One extra environmental element, be it the pollution, be it the lack of food source, be it the orcas, and I think sort of a combination of everything has just made it bad. And for some other reason, they seem to have stayed away. We might not have lost all the sharks. They might just have found an area further up our coast, which is far more enticing, and whatever they could get in False Bay, they could get there. So we'll see. But the orcas, they will definitely have an impact, but to me, it'll be a short-term impact. They will come in, kill a white shark, and no white sharks were confirmed killed by orcas in False Bay, to the best of my knowledge. And we've seen it with my own eyes. I've left Simonstown with groups of people in the morning, ran into orcas, not Port and Star, but other orcas, been to the island, seen white sharks, left, done an afternoon trip, seen them again. So Port and Starboard, they seem to have definitely targeted sharks. And if they make a kill, no two ways about it, those sharks will leave, but they won't leave for a year and a half, and they won't chase the entire population of white sharks away. They might chase the few that were in the area, the 5 or 10 or 15 sharks that are there, and they might move away for 5, 6, 7, 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month even, but not the mass decline and drop off that we've seen. So as I said, there's a multitude of factors. I just think there just weren't as many white sharks we thought they were in the get-go, and with them possibly being caught through sharks board, drum lines, longliners offshore, and their food source being diminished, and the pollution being infected, and the odd orca coming through, I think all of that just plays a part.
And the behaviour thing with sharks I always found fascinating, with the fact that they will disperse and disappear, even if you say it's just for a short period of time. That kind of rings home to me that it just shows how little we know about them. That how does that message go out? There's one shark kind of screaming to the other ones that danger. There's danger in the area. Go. I mean, how does that even work? Have you any thoughts how that behavior functions?
Look, you speak to the old fishermen there, and a lot of them said if they were fishing and you wanted to chase the sharks away while they were catching your fish, they said you would always catch one shark, kill it, and drop it overboard, and the sharks would disappear. It could be scent they give off in the water. It could be the smell of the rotting carcass. You can never say 100% when it comes to wildlife, but there's definitely a fight or flight scenario in every creature. When they get to the stage where they realize, obviously, orcas are there, he's bigger, he's stronger, he's cleverer, there's 5 or 10 or 15 of them, they're pack hunting me, and they would leave. So it's not unique. It's been witnessed in California, of the Farallon Islands. They were some of the first guys to document the case when the orcas would arrive, that the white sharks would leave. I think there was a guy called Scott Anderson did a lot of work there with Peter Powell back in the days, and they were the first guys to sort of note the case that when the white sharks arrived, the orcas arrived, the white sharks would disappear sometimes for 2 months at a time, but they would always come back. So there's always that hope. And as I was saying, this year is sort of, it's hard to say because we're sort of in June now, and this should be traditionally our prime season. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next few days when we get out, to see if there's been a change or if it's going to be the same as last year. Or we get there and there's a few white sharks bobbing around. We just don't know. And hopefully it's the latter. We get there and there's some white sharks.
Just coming back in terms of sharks behavior per se that we've noticed, I think when Osage was done as well, we saw the sharks leaving the area, once Osage has been around, and it seems to me that they were able to sense or the distress or something like that. It was a very interesting behavior that we noted, and maybe through also these white sharks being hunted, that maybe a white as the interspecies, they kind of like give out a signal or kind of a response that is picked up by other sharks that they then leave them vacate the area. So it's just something that again, we don't really know. It's all speculation, hypotheses, but through observation. But it's just it's a very interesting topic, and seeing the shark's behavior change and move around and so forth. But having said that, I just wanted to ask Rob as well. This is one thing I always found so interesting is that we were sitting at the island and waiting for sharks to arrive for the cage. You were like stomping on the boat and using your boat, your boat hook or something like that. You stomp on the boat and create like a chopping noise, and that seemed to also bring the sharks around.
We'd just make noise, because they would hear us.
Yeah,
or they would sense a shift in the vibrations. So we've noticed over the years of sitting, particularly in very calm days, when it's super rough and everything's banging around, it's less effective. But in days when you're sitting waiting and the water's dead calm and it's a more pondish, and you'd see the shark swimming in the distance, not necessarily in your chum line or burley slick, and you bang and make a noise, they would change course and pretty much head straight for you. And not every single time, but we'd seen it enough that there's no harm in doing it. Yeah. Especially when you've got to steal the shark from a boat in the close by facilities, it works pretty well.
This is also the thing that some people on our group often quote, and when the whole chumming debate comes in, and we try and educate as to exactly what chumming means, because people do think it is tipping all those buckets of blood in the water and livers and so on, and we try and educate about how chum and bait actually works. But some people always throw the argument in, well, you don't even need chum and bait, because in Australia they just play AC/DC on loudspeakers and that brings the sharks to the boat. I'm sure it's not that simple, but that rhythmic banging, I think, is something that's always been sort of documented historically, isn't it? That will attract sharks, like in a shipwreck incident or a boat going down. They'll be attracted to those kind of noises.
Yeah, no, the sound thing is I think fairly well documented, that it's got some form of attraction, especially white shark being a top predator, and they've got this sound that's not meant to be there. So they're curious by nature, so they will go and investigate. Yeah. So that's sort of the simplistic theory behind it, is if you make a noise, you're trying to stand out from the crowd, he'll come and have a look at you. Probably the opposite if you at a shipwreck. But yeah, it's definitely worked from anecdotal evidence we've seen over the years.
Can I ask you on a different topic? Obviously, I've been out there, making a very small budget film with yourself. But obviously, you've worked with, BBC, Nat Geo, Discovery. You've been behind the scenes on a lot of those productions. How do you think that's changed with not so much the Shark Week content over the years, because I think there's a general consensus it's not kind of what it used to be, but how's that changed in terms of you taking out crews to actually go and film? Because the expectation, like you're talking about expectations of guests earlier, what about with film crews? Because to go out there and get an amazing sort of slow-mo phantom cam breach, that you could be out there for days, weeks to try and get that kind of thing. How are the crews these days for wanting to go out there and do productions?
There's very few film crews, especially over the last season or two. Also, it's probably a product of our own success, because, as you say, with the Phantom high-speed cameras and that, and we were so successful for those 7-8 years leading up to probably 2018. I wouldn't say the market's saturated with it, but there's substantial footage out there. So the crews have declined. So the crews you get nowadays, it's changed a lot from the early days with the with the National Geographic guys and the Discovery Channel guys, where they did a lot more natural history shows and they sort of showed it as is. Nowadays, what's happened, particularly with your Shark Week stuff, they almost pre-write a script and they'll shoot a sequence, a once-off with some elaborate cage or platform or something to make it super daring, and they will sell it that it's the world first and it's groundbreaking work, and they'll do one segment and one screenshot, and it looks all spectacular because of the high-speed camera work, but people don't do that on a regular basis. It never gets done again or after. It's because they need to sort of outdo the next year to try and sell it. It almost becomes, I wouldn't say a Hollywood production, but they have a script beforehand and say, we're going to do this much and that, and we're going to have a sequence, and we're going to build up the middle shot of doing this and cut along. So it's changed. I've always preferred to do sort of the natural history stuff where they focus on the animal and the environment, what they're forming. And I'm not a huge fan personally of the presenter being the star. Because as soon as that's the case, then you have to sort of manipulate angles and shots to get someone in the code. It's got its place, but it's something that I've, maybe to my own detriment down the line, I've never really enjoyed doing.
The drama and the sensationalism is the thing that gets me, because when you talk about that one sequence, and someone will go out and shoot some epic looking camera shot, but then you've got to string like a whole 45, 50-minute show and around that. And then you just tend to get that repeated and repeated and repeated, or change the music, or like you say, stick someone else in front of the camera to talk about it, or do the fake, reaction shot after that clearly wasn't done at the time that happened. But you've had Hollywood crews out there as well, haven't you?
We've had everything.
I remember that film. I don't want to mention it because
that one, yes.
Yes.
No, we've done everything from what changed a lot with the breaching activity was the camera technology, was the phantom high-speed cameras, where they had sort of like a memory loop. So shark would breach, and 2 seconds later they would fire the button that would shoot at 1,500 frames, 2,000 frames a second, or whatever the case might be, and it would sort of memorize 2 seconds back. Where some of the early shows, like the very first time when we had breaching stuff, they were shooting with Super 16 form, so high-speed form, and they sort of had to either press it as the shark jumped, so they would miss the initial jump, or take a chance and just start burning form. I worked with a big French company who did that, where we had a 35mm form projector on the back of the boat and a gyro mount, and we just burned form all day long.
Very expensive.
Dirk was saying earlier, waiting for it to happen as the reel runs out, the shark would jump, or before it was ready. They got some sequences, but the camera technology changed, and it's just revolutionized the stuff, the high-speed stuff and the form. Look, it's amazing. It's like the stuff, some of the Shark Week footage is unbelievably nice, and a lot of it's been shot off with myself and that, but then they have the footage, and then they've got to create a star, and they work around an angle, and they have a particular sequence, and they have to make it dangerous because he's going to get eaten. And it's, as I say, it's something that, clearly to my own business detriment, but it's just something I don't like doing.
Well, it might be to your business detriment, but I think it's, to be fair, Rob, it's hats off to you, because not everybody does buy into that. And if you can try and inject, I mean, we have this discussion every year, don't we, Dirk? Every Shark Week, every year on the group, there'll be discussion around, this is not how it used to be. I wish we could see some more of the natural history. But then the other argument, the counter argument is it gets the average Joe interested and hooked on sharks. And so it gets some discussion going of any kind.
Yeah, but I always believe there should be a balance. I mean, there were years that Shark Week was just stupid. I mean, there was nothing you could actually watch. Everything was sensationalized. Everything was as Rob says. Sharks swam past the boat, and you heard the danger music come out and stuff like that. I mean, just uncalled for. It just kind of created the wrong perception that we were fighting for, that these sharks are not as portrayed by the media. And I really hold Rob in high regard for keeping the kind of the sanity a lot of the shows do that together as well, because these guys sometimes just run away with the show, and it kind of becomes something that the shark isn't, and all you see is teeth and writhing and splashing, and everything's like high danger. And sure, I mean, we obviously out there, you got to be cautious in working with them, but again, they are being brought to the boat. You're trying to provoke a reaction out of from these sharks, and that's obviously the whole reason for the film. But yeah, it's a lot of things changed, and I must say, it's more shows have actually come around that are much more realistic and actually show the sharks in their real environment versus just blood and guts and just teeth and just monsters and so forth, the deep. What I still really cringe about it, and you might have a really good show, but you got an abhorrent title.
Yeah,
killers lurking or whatever. I mean, there's a couple of really, I thought, like, wow, I mean, what a weird. It's and the show is actually quite good, but the title is just is just just turns me off completely.
I think we talked about that on one of the other episodes with the White Shark serial killer show, or serial killer
Yeah.
White Shark. But like you say, the content was actually about how that kind of forensic approach that you'd normally take to say like a serial killer, you can apply to nature and sharks. And like you say, the content was good, but
Yeah.
man, the titles, no, thank you. No time for that at all.
Yeah, left a lot to be appreciated, but yeah, it's but I get that.
Indeed. Rob, I just want to ask you a little bit around personalities of sharks. I know when all your crew start knowing, the names of sharks, whether that's Cuz, De Rossi, Mayhem, but, all these names throw out. And I know we briefly talked about it before, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. That I've always considered that something that should be publicised more, but could be in danger of kind of making them into cuddly pets. And you get it with Guadalupe right now. Every year, all the operators are saying, oh, you need to come and see, Deep Blue, or you need to, they're always throwing the name of the shark out. Do you think that's a healthy approach to advertise like the personalities of sharks?
Probably good and bad, but there's definitely is a personality trait among certain ones, or especially the ones that interact with a boat, shall we say? Because there's, I experienced in False Bay when we had the big volumes of sharks, you would have a lot of sharks that would, it's a double thing. It would come back to the chumming scenario as well. Some sharks, no matter what you did, had no interest in your boat, whatever. And it's like literally, we had the one shark that we call Shy Guy that's bobbed around that you would see through photos of its dorsal fin or its tail fin on kills. Very successful hunting shark. And then up to the boat, it will literally do what we would call a flyby. It would come up, make one turn, gone. And then we'd have other particular sharks that would interact with a boat, some would chase the decoy, some would chase a bait, some would just swim around the cage. So that is nice, but that sort of also plays into the narrative, like I was saying earlier, that we probably overestimated the number of sharks. That if we would see these same individuals year in and year out, at particular times of the year, doing the same thing, coming back, some of the sharks being seen over a decade. And in Guadalupe with Deep Blue, and I'm sure they've got several others they've got names for, it actually shows that these sharks are definitely far more vulnerable than we realize, because they're also depending on interacting with maybe 10 or 15 individual sharks on a regular basis, or 20. And if it's only 20 or 40 or 50, it's not a lot of animals. And I think then you come into a scenario like ours, where it could be a seasonality change for 2 years, where they might run into, I don't know, various problems, be it orcas or pollution or whatever, and they might just disappear. And it could be gloom and doom, or it could just be a case that those particular 20 sharks are not coming in the bay for whatever reason, and they're moving 10 Ks up the coast, or 5 have been killed, or 10 have been killed. Now you're only dealing with 5 or 6, and that could lead to the reason why our numbers are so down. That's just very, very interesting but there's definitely a personality thing. Sort of digressed on the personality thing, but I don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing, but they're there to be admired, but you also have to respect them.
I guess how quickly, when a shark does rock up at the boat, how quickly do you recognize which shark that is? Is it behavior? Is it a marking?
It's usually obviously purely from visually when you see the shark, but it's that and combination of the behavior. So it's usually a mark or a sizing or scars or the white blotching on its fin, but instantaneously. Especially the ones that are super active around the boat, those ones you would literally recognize, as I say, instantaneously or rock up. And then some would just be too generic from the next year, come make 3 or 4 turns, and you might see that shark over the next 2 or 3 days. But we wouldn't give it a name or human sake unless we've had some sort of interaction. And the name's usually the first thing that someone calls out, be it one of the crew or the guest, as long as it's not too stupid. But a lot of the names are, once the name comes out, it generally sticks.
I always believe that it is one of those areas. I think you see it with the ecotourism, that now they're starting to use the specific shark names, especially for Guadalupe, that come out and see not just Deep Blue, but all the sort of known names out there. I do think it is a really good driver for ecotourism, because people will book a trip going out and it'll be, I want to go see Deep Blue. But then I also think there's an expectation issue with that. You booked a trip to go and do that, and you've taken, 2 days to travel out to Guad, and then you don't get to see that shark. So I think it is a driver for ecotourism. I mean, Dirk, have you any sort of thoughts on that? Did you get to know specific sharks while you've been out on photography trips?
I was fortunate. I mean, I visited both Guadalupe last year as well, which was absolutely amazing. Compared to False Bay, it's obviously completely different. It's a very long boat trip. It's like literally an overnight boat trip, and you can either be a rough trip or a smooth trip. And the smooth trip was going there and the rough trip was going back. But the water clarity is obviously a big factor, and the size of the sharks are obviously completely different as well. But yeah, and their sharks have personalities too. I mean, you know which one's going to rush the cage, which one's just going to swim by. Some sharks, like Lucy, just swam by in the deep and she never came up. And you know them. I mean, the guys that operate them know the sharks. They've actually got a whole book that was, I think, can't remember who actually put it together, but of actually identifying shark with all the different names, and guests were actually encouraged to spot those sharks and take pictures and so forth. And then, they kept a record database in terms of the shark's reappearance. But I remember one, I don't know if Rob gave her the name or if we gave her the name, but it was Cruella. There was two males that were cruising around the boat, and they were quite, relaxed and placid. And then all of a sudden they disappeared. They were gone. And then about 3-4 minutes later, the Cruella appeared. And I still remember being on the duck board and in the water, and she kind of came up between the two hulls, and she was quite an aggressive shark as well. So they definitely have different personalities, and as Rob points out as well, I mean, these sharks change from day to day as well. I mean, sometimes you might see a shark that's for 2 days is just around the boat, he's playing with the decoy and so forth, and the next day he's a completely different shark and trying to bite everything and so forth, and obviously hasn't been feeding. So it's great to be able to see the same shark over and over again, and you kind of look out for them. You hope they make another year, because we all know how much pressure these sharks have got out in the open sea with the netting and the long lining and so forth, and the pressure that they face. So yeah, it's always been great, and that's I think sure Rob can tell volumes about how many sharks he's seen over year and year again, and we all know the big story of Nicole that swam from Mossel Bay. I think it was Gansbaai, Mossel Bay, all the way to Australia and back again. So there's some good stories about recognizing sharks, and Shark Nicole obviously being famous for that too.
I wanted to ask you if we can get into discussing a bit. I mean, myself, I'm very pro cage diving, pro ecotourism when it's done correctly. I kind of think I landed very, very lucky getting the recommendation for yourself at African Shark Eco Charters from the get-go, because you kind of set an extremely high bar in terms of how you operate ethically. Can I ask you on this topic of chumming and baiting, because it's something that we always get into on the White Shark Interest Group. Can you just clear up exactly what you do in terms of chumming and baiting?
Okay, well, chumming and bait, look, we're very restrictive in what we can and can't use locally. Also, there's a lot of the chumming and baiting scenarios disappeared now that we haven't seen a white shark the whole of last year. So to all the people that thought if you put chum in the water, white sharks are going to definitely come and you're going to condition it and it's going to follow your boat around and attack everybody. I wish that was the case and I would have had a white shark at my boat last year. So that sort of dispels that thing. So if the white shark is not in the area and not in a certain distance of your boat, no matter what you do, you're not going to attract it. So first of all, you have to have sharks in the area at a certain time of the year. We are working around a seal colony where at its peak have probably got 60-odd thousand seals on it. And the nature of anchoring a boat, you can only lie in one direction to wind and or current, which is the same way that your central from the island would go. We've just got a small amount. You generally use a tuna head or some sort of fish product. We don't use any mammal products, no blood from cows or oxen or whatever the case might be. It's generally just tuna. The tuna is the most viable thing because it's the easiest to get hold of, and it seems to work relatively well, and it's a byproduct of a big fisheries that's already existing in Cape Town. So we use a tuna head, you put that in the water, and generally you'll probably stomp on a tuna head, or you'll have some mashed up mackerel or some sardines, and you'll mix that with a bit of water, and that'll form like a little slick, which will make a central, which will help the sharks locate you. And that is pretty much it. And as I say, like we were alluding to earlier, some of the sharks will be highly interactive around the boat. Others will not be. We've had days on multitude of occasions where you've had several predation events, successful, and you get nothing to the boat. Another day you'll have the same conditions as the morning and you'll have multitudes of sharks. So I think it's got a lot to do with the individual shark. But as far as altering and changing behavior, it's not going to do it. As I said, if I could alter and change the shark's behavior, I would never had a trip where I haven't seen a white shark, and I would get sharks every time. If the shark's in the area, they will interact with you, and you You have to keep the interest some way. That's sort of it. It's not a hell of a lot of thing. Every fisherman, when they're fishing for, be it for various species of fish on anchor or tuna fishing or whatever, will form a burley line, a chum line. It's trying to attract a predator to your boat, and that's exactly what we're doing.
There's a natural chum slick anyway, isn't there, at Ireland, essentially? Like you say, you kind of sat in it.
Massive chum slick at the island. There's a multitude of things in the island, and you always sit, unfortunately, most of the time downwind of the island, and you're in that chum line 99% of the time. So, but as I said earlier, if chumming and that could guarantee me and change sharks' behavior, I would have never missed a shark trip in my entire life, which is not the case.
Yeah, I still think the Jaws factor comes in when I talk to people who haven't been out on a cage diving trip about chum. The people who don't sort of understand or haven't seen the videos, this still just the image they have is, Brody at the back of the boat with the bucket full of blood throwing stuff over. That's people still have that in their memory from however many years ago Jaws came out, and it still lingers.
No, it does. Well, like it's that innate fear of, I don't think you'll ever change it really. We can try, but people are going to be fearful of snakes and spiders and scorpions and sharks no matter what. Even if you don't get snakes in the UK, people are scared of them. So it is what it is.
Oh, we do get some snake. My boy's looking for one out in the garden now. He's looking for grass snakes. He's doing his damnedest to try and build something to attract a grass snake to the garden because there's one a few houses up. So no, you get them, but like you say, you can be scared of a white shark for different reasons, as we know, to say a land-based predator.
I just want to add to that is that, many people, ask me, like, there's the debate about cage diving, and we can obviously have a completely different story, a bit different podcast on that. But I always found that people that have, there's always a difference in when you leave on an island, there's a whole bunch of new people that have never seen a white shark. There's a different perception, but when they come back, everybody's talking white shark. It's like it's a magic button that gets pressed when they see this, beautiful animals swim past the cage or breaching and just being there. I personally believe that cage diving has had the most positive effect on changing humans or people's perceptions on white sharks. That's just my opinion, but it's just that I've seen such a multitude of people change your opinion and change the whole outlook on white sharks once I've been on one of these trips. And I know, Rob's, you're probably tired of seeing it, but it's just such a magic. I always love seeing that kind of interaction afterwards.
No, every trip, you'll always have someone that's either fearful or skeptical, or it's very, very seldom you'll have, almost never the person will have the same attitude when they leave. Look, it's the only way you can really show people white sharks. Even to this day and age, you don't find them in captivity. You can't keep them there.
Yeah.
They are the last truly wild animal out there, and it's like the only way you're going to go see a white shark is going with some sort of dive operation where you actually look for them. You might be lucky and find one in a normal uncaged dive scenario somewhere along our coastline or in the US or wherever, but to go and look for white sharks, there's only a few handful of spots or known spots in the world, and the only way you can do it is through a caging scenario, because that's just the way things are.
I was terrified when I first came out on the boat. Absolutely terrified. I mean, I've told this story, I think, on one of the podcasts, but when we first came out, Rob, as obviously me and Rachel as tourists, and I thought that our trip was on a Wednesday. So we're on a Monday and we're just sat on the beach in Simonstown thinking, we've got another day, we've got to get prepped up for this big thing of I'm going to go out and see great white sharks, and the fear that was with it. And then your guys gave us a call at the guest house saying, actually, your trip's on Tuesday. Are you all set for your trip tomorrow? And we're like, oh man, we thought we had a day to kind of prepare for this. And I remember going down on the jetty that morning. And it's still now, it's magical. There's so many days when I see the sunrise, or even in the UK, and I think, I wish I was in Simonstown on that jetty at 5:30 in the morning, 6:00. It's a magical experience. But I remember absolutely terrified. And then it took, like Dirk was saying, it took, seconds out on a boat of seeing an actual white shark. But like Dirk said, you must see this every single trip. You must see perceptions change.
No, you do. It's one of the most, it's very rewarding. And also you meet, it's also people, it's very interesting because you meet people with totally every walk of life from all corners of the world. Everybody's drawn there to this mythical, magical animal. And it's amazing to see, actually, that people are taking the time out from everywhere. And it's their perceptions. You get the few shark crazies that are totally into sharks that have done it, traveled all over. But generally, most people that we deal with, because of where we're based, and it's a day trip, and it's usually day trips unless you're working with your more seasoned guys over the peak of the year. 90% of our clientele is sort of day trippers that come and go. Some of them know what they're doing, some of them have no idea. and everybody leaves with hopefully everybody leaves with a different perspective of arriving. But we think we do a fairly decent job of getting them to see the animal for what they really are.
Yeah, I think you're being modest again. It's not a fairly decent job. It's a phenomenal job because I mean, again, I saw people going out on those boats, and even like my brother-in-law went out on there. It was on honeymoon. I think he came out with yourself, and even on, like you said, even on a slow day when you might not be getting those sharks, just being out in that place with you guys and sharing that knowledge, absolutely 100% actually changes people's lives, and makes advocates of Joe Bloggs, who comes out there because he sees the big shark and the teeth and its interest and gets out on a boat and realizes what this creature is all about, and 100% makes advocates of people down the line, which is, I guess, Dirk, why we have a white shark interest group. Yeah,
that's right. And I think also to that point, and I'd like to plug your I think your really great documentary that you made about the shark legend is, I think it sums it up very well as well. It's not and that's the whole thing about these trips as well. It's not that you're going to see this monster. You're not going to go away with like, wow, this is the monster that everybody describes. And you've done it very, very well in your film.
Appreciate that.
Shark Legend. You say that to really demystify that whole experience, and just by watching your documentary, you'll get a pretty good idea in terms of what's out there and what you expect. It's a more realistic approach in terms of seeing sharks versus the sensationalistic media hyped and sometimes Nat Geo, Discovery Channel titles that you kind of cringe of. But yeah, so I can really speak for that, and I've always been a great proponent for shark cage diving because I think it's really important to educate people on great whites. And as Rob also alluded today, is that it's really difficult to get them to your boat. It's not like they're waiting there for you. It's not like they'll circle your boat immediately that you throw anchor. And it can be days sometimes that you don't see one, and or that they're there, but they just don't come to your boat. They're elsewhere. They're hunting, or they just staying down deep.
I do remember on one trip out there where somebody had seen me sat with a camera, and again we were very, very low budget. We're not Discovery Channel, but someone said, "Hey, is this going to be on Discovery Channel?" And I turned to the lady and said, "Oh God, I hope not." And she kind of looked at me like, what? What's wrong with Shark Week? And I'm like, yeah, that's not, we really don't want to do that. But again, Rob, I can't thank you enough for I've shown that film in schools. We've had it online. It's available now on Amazon for the amount of people who learn something. And okay, I put the documentary together with Rachel, but we're going out there, and if you don't have something to point your camera at, and you don't have that kind of insight from like yourself, Rob, then you can't really tell that tale. So, again, just on the back of that, thank you so much for that. And I know you have a whole crew and a team that work with you as well, and Karen in the background who keeps things ticking along. Must give a nod of the hat too.
No, thank you. So hopefully we'll get to have many more days like that. Hopefully these last 2 years have just been a blip in nature, and we'll have many more better ones to come, hopefully.
Well, I hate to say it, but we're really kind of just getting out of time at the moment, Rob. So all I could say is absolutely want to thank you 100% for your time today. I would love to have you back on the podcast if we can.
For sure, anytime. I really enjoyed it.
If you are listening to this podcast and you're not a member of the White Shark Interest Group, you can find us on Facebook. Just search us there. We also have our Instagram platform, which is White Shark_Interest Group. You'll find on there not just phenomenal images from, we've had some of Rob's pieces on there as well as Dirk's. You'll also find we like to put a bit of fact and knowledge behind those images as well. So please head over and follow us on Instagram. You can also find us on YouTube. Some people listen to this podcast there, and we've got some other videos there as well. And that is, again, just search the White Shark Interest Group on YouTube. And we have our website, the whitesharkinterestgroup.com. So with that said, again, thank you so much, Rob. Dirk, thanks again for being on this podcast today.
Pleasure, really.
Thank you.
And we will see you guys on the next episode.